Welcome back and many thanks for staying with us. And please, thank you for making us the #1 breakfast show in the country. Now, let's just get into the next conversation. Well, student protests have rocked Makerere University for the last 2 weeks. 2 weeks, yeah, that is actually correct. After the administration sanctioned a 15% cumulative increment on tuition over the next 5 years, the government responded with an iron fist. That could be an understatement. In the full glare of cameras, security personnel raided halls of residence of the students where they subjected these students to corporal punishment, turning the hallowed grounds of learning into a theater of anarchy. Wow. Today, the dispute over tuition remains unresolved. But does the university have alternatives in the pursuit of improving its financial position? That's the $64,000 question that we'll be joined by Mr. Emadum Taizibwe, our investigations editor at the Daily Monitor, whose panorama story ran yesterday and also discusses and tries to offer solutions to Makerere's problems. He does join me right now in studio. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Mr. Taizibwe.
Yes, please.
Please tell me, as we begin, what is happening at Makerere University and what is the possible remedy in the short term?
Well, what we've seen in the last few weeks, like you ably said, is protests.
Yeah.
Protests that have been met by the full force, the wrath of the coercive instrument, that is security personnel. And we've seen videos which are very unfortunate of students being, being subjected to corporal punishment in their residence, halls of residence, which was quite unfortunate. The president has made a statement about this before the NRM Parliamentary Caucus recently, saying he wasn't aware of who carried out or sanctioned. I don't have the capacity to know whether he was able to know, but generally for a head of state and with this kind of thing, you don't think that there should be an uncoordinated movement of troops, that soldiers should be able to go in a place of an institution of higher learning, and subject students to that kind of treatment, because this is quite a matter which is civil in nature, that requires an amicable solution than tear gas and all these kind of things.
My brother, I think it's not rocket science to actually find out that the president right now is trying to save face. I think he actually did know that something was happening at Makerere University, and he did know that the army was actually there. You saw when the Daily Monitor broke that story that the urban centers were rife with criminal gangs. He came out and was like, oh, okay, we are going to do this point plan. That means he knew. So at Makerere University, there's no way you can tell me that after even that 1 week when there were protests and students being roughed up, that he didn't know. So I think we are seeing him come out previous week to just save face, calling on the NRM caucus and not the education ministry. You see that part? So it's still politics in that, still the NRM trying to solve this problem, not the state agencies that are mandated to do
Perhaps
this.
let me say he's been remorseful in regard to what happened, because that was extremely unfortunate, that students could be subjected to that kind of treatment from army officers. There was no need whatsoever to deploy the army for, a dispute that should have been resolved in the boardrooms of the university.
Is this true that the Kano that ordered that use of force has already been detained at Makerere?
Well, for me, that's not the major issue about whether this man is detained or not. Perhaps, maybe it would be good, definitely, to bring him before the full force of the law. But the more important thing is, how do you ensure that this kind of incidents don't reoccur?
That's the $64,000 question, my brother. So how do we make sure that these incidents do not occur in the short term?
Well, it's very simple. Solutions of this nature should always be civil. People should reach out. These are merely students. When you read the president's statement, why would you deploy an army with guns, with batons, with tear gas to go and raid a university, when you can simply have these guys come over, have a cup of tea and discuss tuition? Because what's very important in this regard is these are students. They are just part of the stakeholders, because there's also the major constituents. No one is talking about the parent. The Ugandan parent whose income is extremely low. A UBOS survey shows that Ugandans spend about 43%
Indeed.
of what they earn on food.
So nothing
So
is
where
left
do you,
for
where
tuition.
do you expect an average Ugandan to find tuition, or to find money for this increment? Their university. We also have another survey by UBOS, which shows the numbers of students that drop out of university every year, and the highest cause is because about 75% across public and private universities, 75% cannot find fees for the next term, for the next year. What this simply means is, because Makerere is a public university, government should come in to subsidize this cost, because there's a public good in sustaining Makerere and its stellar academic record in Africa, where it, closely is closely ranked with the elite South African universities. In the area of research, it should be a matter of pride to the country that you're charging tuition fees that students can afford and parents can afford.
Well, Dr. Muhumuza, Fred Muhumuza, is a scholar at Makerere University and an economist. He says that, do you, by the way, share his sentiments when he says that a fee increment on tuition isn't the silver bullet Makerere University needs to lift itself out of this financial dilemma?
Definitely. I also believe that this is the way to go. And the university, we are aware, thought about this. One of the ideas is this PPP, where they have a company which is the face of the commercial arm of the university. A few years ago, they put in place a very impressive blueprint, a
very beautiful one in 2030.
Yes, and nothing has come of it yet. Perhaps it's still a work in progress. We don't know yet what is happening, but in this regard, this is the way to go. There are so many alternative ways of financing a public university through public-private partnerships, through, you can get a grant, like it happened in Ghana, where they got a grant of $1.5 billion to improve the quality needs in secondary schools, laboratories.
And it worked out very well for them.
Exactly. So you don't have to impose this burden on a student currently at Makerere whose parent is struggling to make ends meet, who can't find even the current tuition before the 5-year increment takes effect. Is already struggling to find tuition. So you can simply postpone this kind of thing. Why don't you take a grant? And the guys who are going to come to Makerere, the folks who are going to come to Makerere 15 years from now, can also contribute to that cost. And perhaps instead of levying a 15% increment, it's perhaps 3%. We know definitely that the university needs money to run. The university needs to pay better salaries for its staff. The lecturers often strike in this country. They need to build better lecture rooms, reduce numbers of students that are being taught, and offer quality education. But the problem goes back to what even Professor Mahmoud Mamdan sankly captured in his book, Scholars in the Marketplace, at the time when there were neoliberal policy reforms pushed by World Bank at Makerere University, where they opted to commercialize education, but did not critically think about the qualitative aspects of learning.
Well, Mr. Mtaizibwa, you fronted the PPP, public-private partnerships, as one of the alternatives to solving this financial impasse. But then, like you say, 2013, up to now, nothing has been brought to light in regard with this project. So how will this PPP actually be of any use? If 6 years already, since 2013, this PPP hasn't materialized.
Well, this shows that perhaps some of these things, require that entrepreneurial thought and skill.
Yeah.
For instance, Makerere University has lots of land across this city in very prime areas like Kololo and elsewhere. Why could they not go let's say 10 years ago, going to the real estate market.
Yeah.
If Makerere had, invested in this kind of thing, I don't think paying their lecturers should be a problem, because the way universities conduct their business is no longer, conventional. They have diversified. They have an investment arm, because at the end of the day, they want to ensure that there's the ability to be self-sustaining and to be able to meet their ever-growing costs. Two, unlike Makerere, universities elsewhere have things like endowment funds. For instance, the endowment fund at Harvard University is about $40 billion, which is larger than Uganda's GDP, which is about 28 point something billion dollars. So things like that should, start taking effect. There are a couple of people who went to Makerere University who hold quite coveted positions in this country and elsewhere, the Mwai Kibakis who are former heads of state. Why don't you think about starting an endowment fund? Why don't you think about investing in other areas so that you don't overburden a student? Because at the end of the day, the next scientist, the next engineer, the next doctor who is going to do, very specialized operations is this poor kid who is struggling to find tuition.
And I did like what Mr. Fred Muhumuza did say by saying we should involve the studios of this world. If studio can build maybe a lecture room in there, a library in there, maybe after 25 years, he gets his money back and then gives it back to the university after, accruing all the money that he invested in this deal. That would be a very good deal. And then handing it over to the university. Do you find that viable?
Well, Fred talks about building hostels, and
Yeah.
I entirely agree with him. And he says if perhaps this had happened 15 or 10 years ago, definitely it would be to the advantage of the university.
So donors pay over half of Makerere's bills, right?
Who?
Donors do pay over half of Makerere University's bills. Is that right?
I'm not sure about that.
Because they get some money from grants,
Yeah, but I'm not
here
sure
and there.
that they
So
pay, yeah.
that would make it right to say that donors actually pay half of the
No,
money
it's,
right there of the bills.
Well,
So-
it doesn't mean that they pay half.
So
Or-
if they get some sort of funding from the donors,
yeah,
what
that
is
doesn't mean really that they pay
what
half.
is wrong with the university asking Ugandans to pay more?
The point is simple. You can't, like I said, the university needs money. And there's been this, comparison with what happens elsewhere. I'm very aware that at the University of Nairobi and Dar es Salaam University, which are the other academic powerhouses in the region, the tuition is slightly higher or much higher than what Makerere University charges. So if donors give grants in areas of research, they give grants in areas of partnerships, because a public university is for the good of the country, is for the good of the students. But what should be considered in this regard is that when you're going to raise that tuition, which people are you expecting to pay that tuition? It must go, it must be able to match with the income streams. If a parent is the one who bears this burden, and which is most likely the case, because there are very few students who pay their own tuition, perhaps people who are already working, but a majority, about 90%. So the statistic that is very important, the detail that is very important, is household incomes. If household incomes are not going up, then, and you're already locking out perhaps 50% of parents already before even the increment is effected, how do you expect then, where is the magic wand? How do you expect, where are parents going to find that money? If the average monthly income, according to the Uganda Bureau of Statistics survey in 2016-2017, indicated that a Ugandan earns averagely a monthly salary of 416,000. and 43% of that
It's going to food.
is spent on food. Then how about bills like transport, like electricity, like rent, because most of this category perhaps rents it. So the arithmetic doesn't add up. So you must have this in mind, because this is a public university. And I don't think the alternative is to tell people to go to private universities, because as a government, this is your responsibility. Education is a human right. There are so many international conventions that we've ratified in regard to anchoring the right to education.
Well, the good Prime Minister made it verifiably clear that this increment is here to stay till next year in August. We are also seeing the students right now saying that they'll continue to convene today meeting to discuss a way forward right there. So there's also a split within the Guild Council itself. And we saw this split with the University Council at first. Now, if the students are also divided, do you see any end in sight?
Well, I don't want to read so much into whether the students are, divided or not. I think it's very simple stuff that, the university has the ability to manipulate a few student leaders. But generally, is this a legitimate concern? For me, that's what matters. It is a legitimate concern. Whereas on one hand, university education shouldn't be free and cheap, and the university is facing challenges in terms of remunerating its staff and lecturers and offering quality education and all this stuff. What is very, very important? What is very important is you must also think about the people you're serving, who are the students, who are the parents of these students. As long as there's a deficit in regard to affordability, then I think I shouldn't, look so much into whether a few student, leaders who have been, manipulated or compromised by the university council. That shouldn't matter.
Well, Dr. Muhumuza also continues to contend that the key stakeholders were not consulted. And the key stakeholder in this case is the parent, in that case. Because if the parent is not consulted, and the 43% of these parents who use their income on food, so they did not do enough research on this, did they? They did not.
Definitely, that's the issue of concern. Because as a parent, you're the one who is going to bear the burden to pay the tuition. So if you talk about speaking to, they say they spoke to the guild, the student guild. To what extent then are you able to ensure that the parent who is going to bear the burden of paying this tuition has, participated and has, agreed that this should be the position? So as long as there's that problem, we're going to continue seeing more students dropping out of university because, one, it's very clear their parents cannot afford the tuition.
And as those students drop out,
Which
should
is very
expect
unfortunate.
The criminal activities to go up in the country, because now what do you expect them to do? They're out of school, they have no future prospects. So I think government should actually be concerned. If students are going to be dropping out because they can't pay fees, that will translate to a higher criminal rate in the country, because many will try to find alternative sources of funding. And you must agree with me, it's never pretty to find a work out there if you haven't, completed your studies. But then we see this happening, and I think it might translate into a higher criminal rate in this country.
That would be, I think, crass in my view, to think that to suggest that whichever student at university lives is going to end up in some kind of, criminal gang, and they are the guys who are going to be scaling walls and doing all sorts of terrible things.
I didn't want to even mention drug abuse,
however,
but then it's also there.
I think that would be extreme.
Yeah.
However, yes, to a certain extent, it's a matter of concern. When you have youths who are not going to school, who are dropping out of school,
and they're of age,
they could be tempted into all sorts of things, cyber crime. They could be tempted into, it's quite challenging. If you see the volumes of young people who leave this country to go to the Middle East into what is honestly modern day slavery, it's and many of them unfortunately die even when they know the conditions in those countries are dire. And we talk about colonialism and all this kind of stuff. But today, it is even a worse version where we sell our very own people, willingly sell our very own people, our youngsters at their most productive age to go and do, this kind of menial jobs in the Middle East and are subjected to the most harsh labor terms of employment, where they are, tortured, where they are starved, and almost every month now we have a corpse
and it can
returning
and it continues
on
to
a
happen
flight.
to date. Yes.
So these are things that we need to examine as a country.
And so from the get-go,
what could it be? Perhaps an issue of a population explosion that is a mismatch with our growth figures. Uganda perhaps needs to grow at double-digit figures at 11, 12, 10% to be able to provide for its young people. What do we have to do to ensure that we have a population that we can be able to provide for?
I'll tell you what we can do first. We can invest in free education, ensure that all our young people are well educated. And then number two, create numerous factories to offer these young people jobs to be able to work. Number three, put in place a minimum wage. That is the very, very crucial thing right there. Put in place a minimum wage so that these multinational companies do not take advantage of the young people who actually are thrown for these jobs. Because they say, okay, we are coming to Uganda to offer them jobs. But then the salaries scale. You find that even when you get a job, you're just sustaining yourself for transportation from home to and fro. You can't save anything. Let's say, okay, I'm going to save for 2 years and then go back to school. We haven't seen any of that happening. But if we had some kind of minimum wage, all the Chinese, all the Russians, all the Americans that want to set up their multinational centers right here, we would know that, hey, okay, you're going to be paying 1.5 to each and every person you hire. That would be a good case. At least you save at least 500,000 a month. Within a year or two, you're able to go back to school. And this would also help avoid the brain drain, which we are currently grappling with a lot of youth going to the Middle East because they feel like the pay is better there. But if we make the pay better at home, why would they be prompted to leave? So to me, that is the remedy. Make education free, offer minimum wage, create the companies, create the jobs.
I'll tell you, you make an assumption that Uganda can offer a minimum wage of 1.5 million shillings. Basically, a minimum
it's political will.
No, not at all. A minimum wage is premised on the dynamics of the economy. If your economy is so small, no multinational company will come in, because at the end of the day, multinationals come in first and foremost to make, these are blue chip firms that are keen to make profit and take back the money.
But that's the same reason.
Themselves.
That's the same reason they try to engage the government to give them cheap labor, don't you think?
Yes.
To go to the Middle East.
But at the end of the day,
because they know they can take advantage of us.
You can't expect, for countries like Qatar, you have a certain kind.
Yeah.
So a minimum wage is purely determinant on the things about the size of the economy, incomes and things of that nature. You can't, for instance, we all come to work and we all need a good salary, but there are certain, dynamics that determine how much profit your company makes. It determines how much money you should be able to make.
Imagine a Chinese company coming here and paying a Ugandan 150,000
at most,
Ugandan shillings.
Minimum wage, I think, when they were debating, I think they placed it in just, I think it was less than, if my memory serves me right, it was about, at most, 300,000 shillings. Yeah.
That was the last one. But then the economy has since changed and that money cannot sustain you anymore. But then in the 90s, it was more than enough for some people because they could actually pay off a few bills. But right now, 300,000, it's not enough. It cannot even start. Houses, the cheapest could be 150, 200,000. You're left with 100 for food. And then what are you saving for school? So I think a minimum wage in that regard would do a lot more to handle the brain drain issue. Most of our kids are dying in the Middle East, like you've said.
Like I've said,
so these multinationals
a minimum wage can only be determined. You can't come and say you're a multinational firm. You're making, for instance, you're a multinational firm, and you can only make a certain amount of money. If you say that a minimum wage, let me give you the simplest
$500,
example.
not a lot of money.
A housemaid,
Yeah.
we employ them in our homes.
A minimum wage of $500. I don't think
Now
it's
let
a
me
lot.
make the point. You earn you earn a salary of 1 million shillings. So you want a minimum wage of $500. You see how it doesn't make sense?
After,
So you can't
Of
pay.
course, it will change after the minimum wage. My salary will go up.
No, that's not how things work, Chief.
After the minimum wage is passed, I would expect my salary to
No,
also go
no,
up.
no.
But anyway,
The minimum wage
I'm looking at it.
It is depend.
Okay,
it's on,
we
on,
talked about
on
if politicians
the
are, let's say,
revenues of companies.
let's
and
say if a
things like that.
politician comes in the campaigns and promises, because it will happen. In the campaigns, you'll hear someone say, okay, I'm going to offer you a minimum wage and blah, 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 blah. The first thing I would ask is, where is your source of funding? So, in my opinion, if I were the politician and I'm trying to front this minimum wage thing, I'll look at the funding, which is oil exploration. We are looking at 2025. It was 2023, now it is 2025. I'm looking at that oil money coming in. According to my political will, I'll first use that money to handle the issue of minimum wage. First, number one. Number two, under the issue of universal basic income, UBI. That is a very, 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 very good project right there. It has worked for Sweden. It has worked for Switzerland. It has worked for Finland. These countries have the happiest populations because they get some kind of universal basic income. Let's say I do not have money for fees. I would use this money, save a little bit, keep some for food. And at the end of the day, I do not have to resort to other criminal activities to find a source of funding. So our politicians need to understand that. Do not put the student in a debacle where they are forced to look for alternative ways to get funding. If UBI is in place, universal basic income, and you're getting at least every month a little bit of what? Let me say 800,000 Ugandan shillings. And then there's a minimum wage that is protecting you as a worker. And number three, you're getting free education at the university. Trust me, this will be the most beautiful country to live in. We'll have the happiest population. The problem right now is the political will. They are not willing to go ahead with this because they are still investing in the military. All these suffocating the opposition and the activities. So it is priorities and the political will. I think they do have the money.
I think what I need to say in regard to this is this is quite. You're comparing two very different items. Europe, to be very specific, the countries that you're quoting, these are welfare states. These are welfare states. Look at the size of their GDP. Eh? Look at the size of Uganda's GDP. Yes, I know we have corruption. We've not prioritized, but I can assure you, to get to the standard where you quote Switzerland and some of these Scandinavian countries, to get to those standards, to provide in the archetypal welfare state, Uganda needs to grow perhaps I don't have the proper estimate. It needs to register double-digit growth for the next, I think, 50 years or so, which is almost impossible. So we're not.
I
there,
get your
honestly.
point. I get your point very well, Mr. Emmanuel Mutaiziwa. But then we can always borrow a leaf and try. Maybe we cannot just go wholesomely into that direction, but just borrow a leaf and understand.
It's good.
That, yes,
it's good.
It's good stuff
It's
that we
good
can move
stuff.
in this direction, even if it's not.
For
1.5.
instance, you talk
we could
about
just make it a little bit lower.
You talk about the oil revenues. You talk about the oil revenues, and this is a very important resource that the country
I think we've run out of time.
Should harness.
Yeah.
So if we got that money, put it in the coffers, build. For me, I don't think the important point now is to put the minimum wage at 1.5 million shillings, or
it's just an
have
estimate.
a fund. The more important thing I think is for us is for the government to build better and affordable hospitals, better roads, equip schools, pay teachers better salaries and things of that in that regard.
Okay, as we wrap up, you've refused to compare Uganda to the Scandinavian countries because of the GDP, but I had the Minister of Finance for Planning, that is Mr. Bahati, and he was saying that we should borrow a leaf from Cardiff University, that Cardiff University, that's how they were able to resolve the issues at Makerere, by engaging the students, leaders right there, dialogue and everything. So I was seeing him trying to compare Uganda to Cardiff, but then it seems like when it comes to certain issues, they're okay to compare, but when it comes to other issues, they never compare Uganda. It's like they cherry pick what works for them. But then awesomely, if we choose to borrow a leaf from these countries, we should. We shouldn't say that, hey, this is a first world country and this is a third world country. How will we get there if we still look at ourselves as third world countries? We need to look at where the bar is and try to reach it. Right about now, we are going to cross over to our reporter, Mr. Stephen Mbide. Remember, today the primary living examinations did kick off, and he has the latest in that regard shortly after the bumper.